Welcome to the Insights Unlocked podcast. I'm Nathan Isaacs, Senior Manager for Content Production and User Testing. And joining us today as host is User Testing's Mike McDowell, a Senior Solutions Consultant. Welcome back to the show, Mike.
Hey, Nathan. It's great to be back. It's going to be a good one today.
And we have two guests joining us today, Ludwig Fichte and Aarjav Pandya. Ludwig is a staff user researcher at Mozilla after stops at Shopify and SAP. And Aarjav is a senior product designer at Mozilla with stops at Rice, Myatt, and Hasbro. And for our listeners, the Mozilla Corporation is a taxable organization that is backed by the nonprofit Mozilla Foundation. Its flagship product, Firefox, is among the original web browsers known for its emphasis on privacy, speed, and customization, offering users a secure and user-friendly browsing experience across multiple platforms. Today, used by millions of users worldwide. Welcome to the show, Ludwig and Aarjav.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, this is going to be great. I'm really excited to talk to you guys today. I don't know if you noticed this about 10 minutes before we went live. I posted on LinkedIn about the fact that we were doing this podcast and that the 20th anniversary of the Firefox browser is actually coming up. Technically, I know it had the Phoenix name before that, but yeah, November is actually the 20th anniversary of the official launch of Firefox in 2004 when I was just a humble product manager and just coming off my development time. So I remember you guys, Firefox really started it all with the open source and really trying to build a browser for the development community where I was used to the old Internet Explorer and Netscape Navigator war, and everyone's like, this is it. These are the two browsers now. And all of a sudden Firefox came and went, no, we can do one better. And really changed the game in the browser space. So let's talk a little bit. Let's get started with how we got started, basically in UX research. And yeah, just Aarjav, if you want to just talk a little bit about how you got into the space. I sat behind a lot of one-way mirrors in my day. How about you?
So for example, I didn't start out with UX design. I started out with industrial design originally. And I did that because I was always interested in kind of developing new experiences. But when I graduated from that school, I saw that there is a gradual shift in how the industry was designing these experiences. It went from designing physical devices to more of a mixed, which is like physical and digital, to strictly digital experiences. So after graduating, I just moved into doing more digital very strictly. And then I basically had the opportunity to work at two startups from ground up, at one working with a team to create their MVP experiences. And then finally, at the last one, I was redesigning the entire app to make it more user-friendly and significantly improving their experience. And finally, when I joined Mozilla Firefox, I looked at the benchmarking study and again, improving the experience to better suit users' needs.
That's awesome. Actually, I was always jealous of people that were working with physical products back when I was younger and I was doing all digital. There's this guy, Mike Francis. He used to run the technology component of the internet for Hertz in Oklahoma City. And when I'd go there, he'd take me on little tours of all of his lab and all the stuff he was working on. And I was fortunate to get to work on a few hardware things for in-car or kiosk type tech, but it's been mostly digital for me. Ludwig, how about yourself? How'd you get started?
Yeah, my route was a little bit different. So I studied psychology originally. I studied in Germany. This is where I'm from, as you may be able to tell by my accent. In studying psychology, pretty early on, I focused on what we call the psychology of human-computer interaction. And I find this really fascinating. And this basically led me right into the field of user research. And I started an internship in 2007 at SAP in their research team. And then it just happened to stay there for about 12, 13 years or so, working as a researcher for SAP in enterprise software. And I not only did user research projects, I also did a lot of lecturing in user research. I ended up being a research trainer for mainly non-researchers across that company. And I trained thousands of colleagues at SAP in research methods to basically scale research approaches, scale research mindsets across the company. And then in 2018, I decided to move over to Canada. This is where I'm based right now. And then started working for Mozilla as a researcher in 2021.
That's great. And this actually is really nothing new for you, right? Doing a podcast, you've done lecturing, you said you're teaching, stuff like that. So this is old hat, just going on a podcast, right?
Yeah, of course, I do this all the time.
And actually, funny enough, I got a new senior leader from formerly of SAP this year. So I think we have a bunch of ex-SAP folks that probably overlapped with your time there as well. Although it's a huge company, I'm sure you don't. It's like saying, "Oh, you're from Germany? I know someone over. Do you know him?"
It's actually not too uncommon because people tend to stay very long at this company for different reasons. I stayed there for 12 years, but I have many colleagues who stayed there much longer and are still there.
Yeah, I mean, some of those larger companies. I was at Hertz for 22 years. I started there right out of school.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's you can create lifetime friends like that.
For sure.
So thinking about UX and UX research, and we talk about doing studies, usability studies. Today we're going to focus more on benchmarking for mobile, which could be a little bit different, could be similar. There's similarities, some differences. Well, talk the audience through some of the considerations when you're thinking about building sort of a benchmarking studies. This is more of a long-term initiative as opposed to just a one-and-done study. So what are some of the considerations that really need to be taken into account?
Yeah, sure. Well, in general, I would say general considerations for a benchmarking or more kind of a large-scale usability study are not that different from a study you do for more stationary devices or devices like laptop computers or desktop computers, especially when you consider testing remotely using platforms like user testing, right? So we always start with the same thing. It's always a research question that comes first, right? We want to know what is it that we need to know? What is it that we need to find out? What are our research objectives? And once we have that, we need to find out who do we want to talk to? What is our potential audience do we want to involve in our research? How many people do we want to involve? What are their demographics? How are they distributed geographically? What prior knowledge do they have, or do we want them to have with browsers or with one particular browser? What devices do they use? What operating system, and so on. Once we define our research questions, our audience, we then go ahead and define the method. So how do we want to approach our people, our users, or users of browsers in general? Remote, in-person, moderated, unmoderated, one-on-one sessions, group sessions, what platforms or what tools do we want to use to record the data? And then lastly, what are the biases that we have to deal with based on the decisions we made so far? And then once we're there, it's basically straightforward for any type of research that we do. So we come up with a screening document to define and recruit our audience. We write a test plan, or interview guides. We prepare the prototypes if applicable. We run pilot sessions. We launch the study. We monitor the incoming data. We adjust the study as needed while it's running. And then even more importantly, we share preliminary findings as soon as possible with our teams and the stakeholders that are all involved in the study. We analyze the data, we summarize the findings, and then discuss recommendations for products. We discuss next steps, follow-up research, and so on.
So you mentioned something in the middle there that I wanted you to just dig a little deeper on.
Sure.
The idea of having to adjust the study while it's running. That's sort of a nuanced thing and how it affects the overall output. And just talk a little bit about maybe the implications of adjusting the study midway because of something you found and why you would do it, actually.
Yeah. Well, basically, because when we look at incoming data, we may find out that, oh, wait, this is not the user distribution, for example, that we expected, right? And as an example for this benchmarking study, we wanted to have a more generally population kind of outcome. So we wanted the age distributed based on general population. We wanted the demographic distributed across, normally distributed across the region we were testing with. And so when the data was coming in, we had to kind of adjust. Oh, wait, we have too many people in this age group, so we need to add more people in a different age group. Oh, we have too many people with this kind of experience. We need to add some more people from another experience. So when I talk about adjusting, it's not so much adjusting the method itself, but it's basically adjusting the audience.
Okay. Yeah, that's one that is fairly common, is that, you realize you're getting an uneven distribution, or, it could be for whatever reason, the amount of people want to take a study a certain day just happen to be more from one place or one gender or one age group or what have you. So we were really talking about the studies there themselves and mechanics. Aarjav, let's take a little bit of a different look at this. And when you're thinking about mobile platforms and different devices and, what are some of the implications, hurdles, trends, challenges? What comes up when you guys are testing across different devices? And what have you seen?
That's a great question. So when I actually compare experiences across mobile platforms like on iOS and Android, and also between different browsers, a few trends and challenges kind of come to mind. The first one that comes to mind is kind of consistency, that is the consistency in design patterns. It is crucial to make sure that your experiences are consistent because users expect familiar design patterns within the app. And even when they are, for example, coming to Firefox Mobile, which is growing now, they expect to be aware about how and where they can find these features and then use these features. But the main challenge when it comes to making sure that your designs and your features are consistent is kind of adapting to the specific design guidelines for each platform. For example, after the benchmarking study, we saw that some of our competitors and other non-browsers were using the specific bottom sheet component quite universally. And I can totally understand why, because it's a very versatile and adaptable component. And it also allows the user to be more contextual. But when we started out the process of actually applying it across our both iOS and Android applications, we had to make special adjustments to make sure that the feature that was being utilized for that in that bottom sheet was not just familiar, but also was strictly following these said design guidelines. So as designers, we need to respect these differences and also not kind of sacrifice the brand's design.
Yeah, that's actually just touching on Android versus iOS. Do you remember when Android, when iOS, they were pushing the flat design? It was like 10 years ago. Everybody just scrambled to copy this flat design concept. And even on Android devices, people were trying to copy it, but it was specifically designed almost for iOS. And it didn't, Android had things like back buttons and things you could use and take advantage of. So trying to purely design flat because of a popular device was really doing a disservice to the Android side. And again, dating myself, I've said a few things that have dated myself, but I remember having a BlackBerry app. so that was a RIM app was a heck of a thing. You touched on one thing there that I swear it should be on a t-shirt that's distributed to every developer and designer out there. And it should say, adhere to familiar design patterns. People expect familiar design patterns. And there's a great book. It's called Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath. And they talk about, why certain things are sticky. And, familiar schemas is the reason. Like if you describe something with something that people know, they will use it. One of my bosses told me long ago, he said, there's a reason that every ATM machine is designed the same. They all look the same because people know how to use it. And it's easy. So don't go try to reinvent the wheel on this. And the last one, I think this is definitely Jacob Nielsen, I'm sure, which is people spend way more time on other sites than they spend on yours. So design your site to work like other sites. You can't teach people how to use in a whole new way. So that's really interesting. And I love that you said that, always consider familiar design patterns. That's what people expect. What are some of the things that you've had to change or decisions that you've made as a result of some of the research? I know we talked a little bit about the benchmark. Anything else come to mind as a highlight or something that was like, wow, we learned that and we had to make a change?
So coming back to the trends and challenges thing and the changes that we would have to make, one more thing that we kind of learned, not from the benchmarking study, but another one that Ludwig did. It is called a top task study, kind of trying to understand how different, like how users are actually using their mobile browsers and what kind of tasks kind of come to light, which ones are being preferred. Some like a couple of kind of tasks were pretty surprised out of the top tasks that were actually listed in that. It was accessing emails and checking the weather. On mobile platforms, it's very common to find apps that allow you to kind of check those, and you wouldn't necessarily want to rely on browsers to do that. But it was surprising that users are actually using quite a lot of these two features or these two tasks on the browser to be able to do that. So it just shows that the user's needs are very particular depending upon what kind of device that they're using and what kind of tasks they're actually wanting to accomplish. And we that actually, and that top task study also guided how we kind of change our strategy around working on these devices and designing for these devices.
All right. Well, let me ask you this question then. How many weather apps do you have on your phone?
I just
If
have
any.
one.
You
just have
one.
and it's
And do you always trust it?
okay, no, not always. I always
Exactly.
go to the browser to actually, and that's
Exactly.
That's
I have, when you turn your phone on, when I turn on my Android phone, it's got the weather right on top, built into the OS. But then I have a weather app as well. And then if they're in conflict, I go in the browser and I go to another one and I look that up. Ludwig, is it the same for you? Do you just have one weather app, but do you exhibit some of that same behavior?
I have a couple, I think, for different reasons. So one is just for everyday weather. Then there's some for wind, because I'm interested in wind directions when I go cycling.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware that wind direction played into cycling. How does it? What's the factor?
Well, you don't want to deal with headwind too much when you cycle, right? So it's always good to know, will I have headwind on the way out or on the way back? And this can often
that's exactly it. It's like when it's really windy when I'm riding, and then I'm like, well, at least the way back is going to be okay. But amazing, it always seems to be windy on the way back too. I don't. It switches just for me.
Wind often changes around noon, so yeah. If you plan wrong, then can happen.
That's actually good. That's good. I never really thought I'm gonna have to open up my eyes to a whole new world about this when I go riding my bike. You were talking, Ludwig, a little bit about the benchmarking, and you were talking about some big numbers there a little bit and having to adjust the audiences and stuff like that. One of the biggest conversations that I see today in research is sort of the balance of qualitative and quantitative now. A lot of people are trying to do quantitative testing on top of qualitative, which is, it's really important to pair them together depending on what it is you're trying to do. In your experience, what are some of the times that quantitative is necessary, even qualitative. Sometimes we're doing quantitative usability studies, things like that. Well, what's your experience been balancing the two different types and how you've done it at Mozilla?
Well, yeah, so there's definitely different approaches in all, like on the whole spectrum, right? So purely qualitative, purely quantitative, and anything in between. Benchmarking, usability benchmarking happens to be somewhere in between the spectrum. It's both, right? So there are qualitative aspects of it, and there are also quantitative aspects of it. And for a benchmarking approach, it's pretty easy to balance it because kind of the method defines what quantitative, what qualitative elements you want to have. If you talk a little bit more general here at Mozilla, we have dedicated research teams focusing on the more quantitative side of research and more qualitative side of research. And we also always try to involve both disciplines, so to say, in our research projects, in our research roadmap and our product roadmap. And again, research always starts with research questions, right? And we build our research, or we work on our research questions together with other stakeholders in product, in design, in engineering, in data science, and marketing. And then once we know what our stakeholders need to find out, we then define, is this a rather quantitative problem? Is this a rather qualitative problem, or anything in between? And this is basically how we balance it.
It's really good. It's clearly a very scientific approach to understanding this and that, evaluating different methods. A lot of times, unfortunately, we see people, they adopt one method and they just stick with it. They just use that method for everything. When all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, as they say, right? But it is super important to blend different types of research together. Like I tell people about, A/B testing on top of usability testing or, concept testing. Yeah, great. You can use user testing or a tool like user testing to do, initial concept testing and get preference between options before you go out and put it in production in an A/B test and risk, 1%, 5% of your traffic. So really important to complement the different methodologies. All right. So with Aarjav, we were talking about some of the, the testing that you did on the browser and the top tasks and stuff. Let's jump back to the benchmarking, Ludwig. Let's talk about the approach to the benchmarking overall. We talked a little bit about the philosophy of, quantitative, qualitative. Let's talk about the approach to the benchmark that you took.
Sure. Well, so again, we had a research question that it's all started with. We had basically two main objectives here. One is we wanted to actually find a way to measure and compare the usability of our mobile browser, Firefox Mobile, compare this to some of our competitor products. And then also we wanted to use this study to identify areas and very concrete opportunities to actually improve the browser down the road. And to be able to compare, you need to set a benchmark, right? This is why it's called benchmarking study. And to be able to set the benchmark, you had to define the context to put the benchmark into, right? So context here meaning, what do people actually do when they use mobile browsers? And believe it or not, we didn't really have a good idea about what do people use mobile browsers for actually, right? So, and this is where this top task analysis study that Aarjav mentioned earlier comes into play. So prior to the benchmarking, we ran a top task analysis study, basically a survey with around 400 people, followed by unmoderated interviews with another 100 people on user testing to understand what are the most common tasks people do on mobile browsers, not only on Firefox, but on mobile browsers in general. And then knowing what people do on mobile browsers, we could then start designing our benchmarking study itself, which we basically decided to do a semi-standardized usability tests here, unmoderated and based on tasks. And out of this top task analysis that we did, we identified a set of 11 typical mobile browsing tasks. Things like performing a web search, comparing information between different tabs on different websites, saving information in your browser, retrieving information from your browser, private browsing, setting passwords and stuff like that. We also decided to collect task-based measures for effectiveness, efficiency, and ease of use for each of those tasks to be able to calculate a usability score for each of the tasks that we test. And we also added a system usability scale questionnaire at the end of each session to be able to collect kind of an overall usability score. And we also added some open-ended questions in the mix as well. Questions around what is your first impression when you use this browser the first time, or what is your impression after you've used the browser now over the past 50 minutes. And we did this initially with Firefox Mobile with 50 people on both iOS and Android, English-speaking, US and Canada-based, with little or no prior experience. And then in the third phase, we rounded up to 3 more mobile browsers, Chrome, Safari, and Brave, with 150 additional participants doing the same study design, benchmark the usability of those browsers, and then we were able to actually compare, okay, where do we shine, where do we lack, what do we need to improve, and then ultimately, how can we improve it?
I love that you also knew that you were going to test the competitive browsers as well, not just for the usability and performance, but at the beginning when you were trying to figure out what do people most commonly do in the browsers, because you were eliminating the possibility that people's behavior was based on the browser itself as opposed to just general nature. And I think that's super important for people to realize that when you're setting a benchmark, especially for not just for the benchmark of the browser, the benchmark of a person, then it's like, well, then let's go beyond just the particular maybe limitations of the browser itself and look at them across the board. I think that's such a really important thing that you did there. And having done all that, having gone through all that, it's a lot of users across multiple operating systems, lots of browsers. The weather was an interesting finding. Any interesting findings from the benchmark?
We can't talk too much about like concrete findings or concrete numbers. So what
lesson learned? Does that have to be a finding? Any lesson that you learned from it?
There were tons of lessons learned, like methodologically, and about people in general too. I mean, this may be the most interesting thing here to share, that when you run studies, especially when you run unmoderated studies, when you run large scale unmoderated studies on platforms like user testing, you deal with human beings without having them in a controlled environment, right? And we looked at each individual video that we took, like 200 sessions, each of them about 45 to 60 minutes long, a vast amount of material to review. We looked at each single one of them, and what we kept seeing was that people understand tasks in different ways. People sometimes don't read instructions if they were asked to do so. Some people talk a lot. Some people don't talk at all. independent of what kind of instructions you gave them, right? People click next, and then answer a task that they were asked to do before, but the system already moved on, right? So there's like all this lack of control that is just based on the fact that it is a unmoderated session. Gives you quite a headache sometimes, and you kind of need to go back into the data and clean it up manually. And but this is just how human beings work, right? I've done a similar study many years ago, but in person and moderated in the lab. The effort was just much higher. The costs were much higher. It took much longer, but it was nice to have the control, right? So you could clarify with participants, okay, what do you think this task asks you to do, like before you actually ask people starting with the task. So there's ups and downs for each approach.
Yeah, that's actually, I'm laughing because when you said the cost and, having control, I mentioned earlier, I was sitting behind one-way mirrors, and it was almost like the bridge of the Enterprise, this, the Star Trek. Everyone's behind the mirror sort of watching and then leaning on edge. And then there's the moderator out there, and she's sort of leading, and you're hoping that she can get them to understand what they're supposed to do. Because a lot of times, like you said, if you don't write your tasks clearly in a remote study, it can disrupt the whole thing. And, I'm guilty of that in my earlier days. Maybe I wrote a task or two that wasn't the most clear thing. And people at the end were like, like you did the SUS survey at the end. Like, I really don't know. I don't know if I did it or not. I'm not sure.
And another example is also user testing has all those tools to also collect some of the quantitative data, right? You asked before about how do you balance qualitative and quantitative data. After each task, we ask people to rate tasks based on how relevant is this task for you compared to what you usually do in your browser. We asked how easy was this task for you on a scale from 1 to 5, I think. And then we also ask how, what else did we ask? I forgot the third one. But then when you go into the data, you see people clicking on 1, but actually saying out loud 5. And okay, now what is it, right? And so you can't always rely on the data given. So you actually have to double check and manually.
And even more common than that one, right? Is somebody says, "Oh yeah, it was very easy," and you just watch them struggle like crazy through the task. Because we know that in self-reported data, people always blame themselves. Usually, they say, "Oh no, it was my fault. I'm sure Firefox people, it was good. I just didn't understand." And it's no, really, it was. You just tell us it was difficult. I saw you. Just took you 4 minutes to do something simple. So I remember years ago, the first time we ever brought a development team into a moderated session, they were behind the glass and they watched someone not be able to see a button, and they were literally melting down. It was like almost something out of a cartoon, because I couldn't believe that someone couldn't see this thing that I thought was so obvious.
That's a good example of always have your stakeholders participate in your sessions in some form. Have them observe, have them at least watch videos afterwards or show them highlight reels, because otherwise nobody will believe you.
That's why I always tell people, if you're recording videos, share those videos, because that's how you generate empathy for the users. All right, so that's a very involved benchmark, a lot of users, a lot of tasks, a lot of effort. Aarjav, let's talk about advice for other teams maybe that are trying to scale research in this way. Be able to balance different methodologies, large scale tests, lots of users, lots of analysis. What advice would you give to people that are just trying to mature their organizations, similar to what you guys have done at Mozilla?
So for us as designers, if I could say, we very want to say heavily rely on our user research partners, just Ludwig, to always guide us what to do and what not to do in terms of what the study kind of asks and what kind of questions that we're trying to get them trying to learn. But at the same time, as kind of Ludwig alluded to, I would recommend that you encourage and enable your non-researchers. It could be product teams or engineers or marketers to kind of not only participate in research projects, but also do activities that lets them understand and learn from their users more directly and basically run their own studies. For that, it's good to have access to these testing platforms like user testing, which is actually very grateful. I'm grateful for. And another thing that can help, and something that our user research team does really well, is provide access to these bite-sized kind of training sessions to learn how to conduct run and actually analyze these studies that you want to do, or questions that you want to get answered. And then finally, making sure that you have a user research team, and then you're going back to them to understand what's the best way to analyze it, and what kind of review that we need to do in terms of what we did, and look at the interview guides, and also check out the different tasks that were conducted in a very strategic manner.
All right, that was great, Aarjav. I mean, definitely people that are looking to scale are going to have some, they got work to do, but there's some good tips there. Thinking about the actual research that you've done, we talked about some of the, the top tests and stuff like that. How are you seeing research directly inform design decisions? Like if people are looking to scale, what could they look to gain from that? And maybe, I know you gave us a great example before with the weather, maybe one or two examples of maybe a decision that's already out there that you can share that was really directly designed, was impacted by the research.
Of course. So I would actually go back to benchmarking study and top tasks together, and all the learnings, all the videos that we watched to understand how our users are doing those tasks, how they're navigating the different features and different surfaces inside the app. And looking at all of this together very, very closely, we actually saw that a certain specific features that could lead to more of a better, improved experience for users. And those features would be toolbar and menus, something that I have been leading here at Firefox. Looking at these, we wanted to make sure that we're targeting experiences so that they can complete these tasks more specifically. If I could talk about it a little bit, we looked at, for example, one of the main core tasks that users want to do is bookmarking. If I could talk about that, there are different ways a user can access these features inside the app, but they were not always very straightforward for some users who are not Firefox users, whereas it was pretty straightforward because they have been using Firefox for a while on how exactly these tasks have been completed inside the app. So we wanted to improve the discoverability and the findability, and basically making sure that users have the confidence to go around the app and pinpoint to specifically what they want to use and kind of interact with these features. So that was the kind of the foundational thing that we kind of understood about our app, and we kind of we strive to improve that for our users. Not necessarily as I can talk about the point that I made earlier about not moving away from the familiarity, but at the same time being innovative by ensuring familiarity. And that's where we kind of found that very narrow path. Again, a lot of kudos to the top task study and the benchmarking study, because that really guided us about where should we be going if we want to make sure that Firefox is kind of a future focused product for users, and they can always come back to it as a browser of choice for them.
That's awesome. And one of the things that you're touching on here with the benchmarking and always coming back to it and going to users over and over again is that things are changing. They're always changing. There always has to be more testing done. A lot of people will think that, oh, we did the research. When did you do that research? Oh, we did it 2 years ago. It's good. We did the research. We're done. Ludwig, as we're coming to the end here, what do you think about that approach? Like, oh, yeah, we did the research 2 years ago. We're done. Everything's good. We improved it. We found out what their top tasks are. We're done.
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't this be great, right? If you could say, I'm done and I do the next thing now and that's it. But I think there's just, especially in digital product, right? There is no such thing as a final product. And even more so in the browser space, where we work on a product that is being used by so many people so prominently during their everyday life. It just is never done. There is no such thing as a final product. So ideally, we keep improving, we keep iterating, we keep testing, we keep exploring the space, and involve hopefully everyone in our organization at Firefox to participate in that, right? So we use iterative approaches by kind of retesting, redoing things. We do multi-method research, as I mentioned earlier today as well. Quantitative, qualitative, and anything in between. We do experimenting as well, right? A/B testing. We put out features in a release just to test them with kind of a smaller audience. We have our data science organization for that. So it's really a very collaborative, iterative, multi-method approach to make sure that the product as it is now will be better tomorrow.
I love it. That was great. That's another t-shirt we should make. A UX researcher's work is never done. That's good for job security. Well, I just want to say thanks to you guys. It's been a great conversation. I think the audience is going to have learned a lot from listening to the approach that you guys have had. But if they want to learn a little bit more, where is a good place for them to go to find out more about some of the great work that you guys are doing at Mozilla and Firefox specifically, maybe?
Well, first of all, we do encourage everyone to give Firefox a try, right? So we've been around for quite a while now. Actually just had 25 years celebration here at the company. And a lot has changed, though, over the past decades compared to the times many people remember Firefox from, right? And ultimately, all the work that Aarjav and I and our teams and our colleagues do will end up in the product, right? There are releases every single month. So every single month, the product improves. So why not give it a try and try Firefox on desktop or mobile devices? Other than that, we have blog.mozilla.org, a site where you can learn more about the company and the Mozilla Foundation, especially as well. We also have a research.mozilla.org site where you can learn about the more scientific research that we've been doing, the research team and other teams as well. And then Aarjav, are there other places as well?
Yeah, of course. We have a very dedicated, a very well-organized design systems team that kind of make sure that we are pumping out really good experiences. So you can actually check them out at acorns.firefox.com. That's also a very good resource to learn and understand how we're building the new Firefox browser for our users.
That's awesome. And I want to say, I don't know if people realize this, but probably this, like, I still look at this as maybe being one of the greatest contributions to browser interface since the very beginning. And Firefox is the browser that definitely popularized it. I think the Opera browser maybe had some slight variation of it. Tabs. The tab approach was something that was implemented in Firefox first, if I'm not mistaken. And it was like a saving grace to, having a million versions of Netscape open or IE or whatever. Now we just have a million tabs open. So, go figure. But this was really awesome. And I've just appreciated chatting with you guys so much. I knew it was going to be a great conversation. And so hopefully everybody, you can look these guys up on LinkedIn as well, but go download Firefox, give it a try. Great browser, great team. Thank you guys just so much for being here on the podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you very much. This was fun.